All right, today we're jumping into this incredible story from ancient history. It's really a story about a kingdom in absolute turmoil, and it's told through these amazing figures who dared to speak up when literally no one else would. We're going to break down this story of warning, crisis, and, surprisingly, a lot of hope.
So just imagine this for a second. Your whole society is just careening towards total disaster. Corruption is everywhere, there's no social justice to be found, and you've got enemy armies gathering right on your borders. In a moment of crisis like that, who actually steps up? Well, for the ancient kingdom of Israel, the answer was the prophets.
Now, to really get what they were all about, we've got to go way back to 931 BCE. See, right after King Solomon's reign, a brutal civil war just rips the nation in two. And this split kicks off centuries of political chaos, spiritual decay, and social unrest. I mean, it was the perfect storm for these prophetic voices to rise up.
So now you've got these two separate kingdoms, each with its own massive set of problems. Up in the north, you had prophets like Amos and Hosea just railing against the injustice and the worship of foreign gods. And down in the south, you had guys like Isaiah and Jeremiah pleading with the kings to trust in their faith instead of making these really risky political deals. But you know, the core message? It was exactly the same. Change course right now, or you will face the consequences.
And that brings us to the first act of our story, the warning. For decades, even centuries, the prophets were basically like human air raid sirens. They were desperately trying to wake up a nation that just refused to listen. Their whole job was to make the danger crystal clear before it was way too late.
And you can see just how high the stakes were right here on this timeline. I mean, these guys weren't just making wild guesses. In 722 BCE, boom, the northern kingdom gets completely wiped off the map by the Assyrian Empire, exactly like they were warned. And yet, did the southern kingdom of Judah learn the lesson? Nope. Their own countdown to catastrophe had already started, leading to not one, but two devastating exiles at the hands of Babylon.
You know, if there's one person who really embodies this whole era of desperate warning, it has got to be the prophet Jeremiah. He's actually known as the Weeping Prophet, and it's because his message was delivered with so much personal pain and anguish. He begged, he shouted, he warned Judah for years that their actions would lead them straight into Babylonian captivity. And that's the absolute crucial point here. The warnings were totally ignored. The leadership, the people, they just blew off Jeremiah and the others as a bunch of pessimistic doomsayers. They just kept on going with their corrupt practices and their foolish alliances, completely deaf to the pleas for change. At the end of the day, they just refused to listen. And then, it happened. In 586 BCE, the city of Jerusalem fell, the sacred temple was utterly destroyed, and the nation's elite were dragged off into exile in Babylon. Every single thing the prophets had warned about had come true. This date, it's not just a date, it's the end of an era, and it's the story's most dramatic turning point.
Okay, but what's so fascinating is what happens next. The nation is shattered, right? The people are living as captives in a foreign land, and suddenly, the prophet's mission does a complete 180. The time for warning is over. Now, it's time to give them a reason to hope. This new role is what we call the exilic prophet, and their job was basically twofold. First, they had to help people make sense of what just happened, to explain that this wasn't some random disaster, but a direct consequence of their past actions. And second, and this is so important, they had to assure them that this was not the end of their story. A future, a restoration, it was still on the table.
And you can see this new mission playing out so clearly through two key figures in Babylon. On the one hand, you have Ezekiel. He's a priest, living right there with the exiled community, and he's giving them these wild, incredible visions of a new temple and a restored nation to cling to. Then you have Daniel, a guy operating at the highest levels of the Babylonian government. He's showing through his own life and these amazing visions that their God was still in control, even over the most powerful empires on the planet. Two totally different settings, but one single powerful message of hope. So let's fast forward to our third and final act. The rebuilding. In 538 BCE, the Persian Empire conquers Babylon, and get this, they actually allow the Jewish exiles to go home. But, returning is just the first step. They came back to a city in ruins and a society that had to be rebuilt from the absolute ground up.
The prophets in this period basically became the project managers for the whole national restoration. First up, you had the prophet Haggai, who had to get people focused. He saw them building their own fancy houses while the temple, the very heart of their community, was still a pile of rubble. So he challenged them, hey, let's get our priorities straight. Then later, after the walls were up, the prophet Malachi had to deal with a whole different kind of problem, spiritual apathy. He called out the half-hearted worship and the social injustice that had already crept back in, pushing them for a renewal of the heart, not just the buildings.
So when you step back and look at this entire history, you start to see this really clear pattern emerge. These prophets weren't just some kind of ancient fortune tellers. They served these very specific, absolutely essential roles, depending on what their people needed at that very moment.
It really all boils down to these three core jobs. Before a crisis hits, they warn. During the crisis, they comfort. And after the crisis, they lead the charge to rebuild. Warn, comfort, rebuild. This three-part mission is really the timeless legacy of the prophets. It's this cycle of speaking truth to power, offering hope in the darkness, and then guiding the whole process of restoration.
And all of that leaves us with one last thought. Because this isn't just some old story, right? It's a template for how you respond to a crisis. And it really makes you wonder, if these ancient voices who were so passionate about justice and leadership and the spiritual health of a nation, if they were to speak to our world today, what do you think they would warn us about?